The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought we were boxing.
All right. We have current world number 3, Tatiana Weston-Webb, on the lineup today. It's a real privilege. We've had you on once before, but it was part of like a triumvirate of some of the world's best surfers talking about potentially going to Tahiti. We've just been there. We're going to talk about it, but it's an honor to have you on one-on-one. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
So I think I saw you pretty briefly when I was in Tahiti, and we're a few days out from the world title deciding Rip Curl WSL Finals. But where are you today? What are you in San Clemente? Are you in Hawaii? Are you in Brazil? Where are you, and what have you been getting up to between Tahiti and now?
So right now I'm actually at home at my parents' house because I'm only home for a short period. Normally on my off season I would be staying at my house, but there's actually it's a rental property, so there's renters coming in, and I chose to come home after Tahiti based on the fact that I haven't been here since April. Obviously it's been a really long year, and feel like at this point in my year, mental health is super important, and I just wanted to come home, rest, reset, relax, and also at the same time prep for finals, which is like super weird, but I'm trying.
That's hard to hold those two things in your heart and mind at the same time, I'd imagine. You know, when you're prepping, I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's not a huge window, and you probably have to wind down following, an event in Tahiti. But then at the same time, as you said, prep for lower Trestles. In this window right now, how much surfing are you doing on a daily basis versus maybe other kinds of preparation?
It's really funny because I think for surfers, surfing obviously is the best way to train and the best way to prep, but sometimes it's actually not, because you can get really in your head, just even about your free surf. So for me, I just feel at this stage in my year, I felt really confident with my surfing all year, and Ross and I have been working on a lot of little technical things that I think have really came through in my surfing, and so I feel actually quite out of shape when it comes to being physically prepared for 4 heats back to back on one day for the finals. And that's something that's really important, because normally in a contest, you don't really surf 4 heats in a day. It's not really something that happens that often. Maybe you'll surf 3 if it's quarters, semis, finals. And that's already a lot. So I am at the moment mostly focused on physical prep work. So I'm getting back into cardio, getting back into, retraining my body to be able to endure 4 heats and giving my all in those 4 heats,
That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about Tahiti for a moment, because there's very, very few women currently on tour who I would say really drove the point home that the women competing in waves of consequence and critical waves is something. It's a future that we're all heading towards, and I remember from when you were just a rookie on tour, really pushing the contest directors to send the women out in more serious conditions. I remember in particular, there was an event in France in one year where it was kind of pumping and kind of big, and everyone was on the fence, and you were just very vocal about like, let's go. I think you went right out and got barreled. You spent your own time and probably money and energy going to Tahiti and putting out edits, and all of that adds up, I think, to kind of a collective acceptance that let's bring the women back to Tahiti, and let's bring them back to Teahupo'o, and we've just finished the first event there in 16 years for the women. What was it like being there for the event? I mean, obviously you'd been in the past, but this is a totally different circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I'm not going to take all the credit because there was a lot of people that got us there. You know, I think Jessie Miley Dyer is one person that's really pushing women surfing and equality, and I think that's something that's really, really helped change our tour for the better. And and I just want to thank WSL too for believing in the woman and putting us out there and showing the world that this is possible. And the more we spend time out there, the more it's going to be better. It's just facts. So, but circling back, I guess I remember sitting in a meeting once and being laughed at when I mentioned like, oh man, I hope Teahupo'o's on tour one day. And literally girls just like laughing at me. And I'm not going to name any names, but I was like, wow, really? Like you guys are literally like laughing at this. And so I think that was probably my second or third year on tour. And fast forward, here we are surfing Teahupo'o. And it's just something that I think that it needs to be a part of the evolution of women's surfing. I think as you all have seen after Teahupo'o, I think the women kind of proved themselves. Like Courtney was amazing. I loved watching her. She had no fear whatsoever. And, some of the girls like Carissa really needed to step up to the plate, and she went and she got an amazing barrel, and like I said, I think the more time we spend at places like that, the more we're going to get better, and it's just a matter of time. But I can tell you that I'm very, very happy that the women are back at Teahupo'o.
For you yourself in particular, did it feel different? Was there any different kind of pressure competing out at Teahupo'o compared to when you travel there in the past to maybe free surf or get some training in and videos? Because I think something that doesn't quite translate to the broadcast is just how close the takeoff spot in the lineup are to the flotilla in the channel, right? And it's like when those sets are coming, everyone's hooting, everyone's hollering, and there's kind of nowhere to hide in competition compared to maybe in a free surf where you're like, there's 20 people out here, like I'll get my waves, they'll get their waves kind of thing. Did you feel like it was much different from a pressure standpoint when you were competing there?
Let me tell you this. The women in particular at Teahupo'o this year really used the men as like a lineup, especially when it was on the ledge. Because I think from the lack of knowledge of the reef, a lot of the women just really didn't know how deep to sit or where to sit. And so I think they just kind of used the men as a reference. And I think that's the one thing that kind of stood out in the heats. You could see that a lot of the girls really didn't know where to position. They didn't know where the south ones were coming. They didn't know where the ledge was coming. They didn't know where the west bowls were coming. So, and honestly, it's really difficult when you're being put out there without those people that know where to sit. And like you said, there's people in the channel that are like screaming at you to go, and it's a terrible like west bowl closeout, and if the wave shifts to west, it's going to close out. If it's right, if that peak's just right on the west bowl, it's going to, barrel and heave, and it's actually a really hard drop to make. It's more technical than the south ones, where up the reef on the south ones, you drop in, you get that beautiful little west bowl into it, and it's just kind of an easier barrel and an easier drop. But I think that's the hardest out there, is just picking that type of wave. And so I really felt that the time that I spent out there helped me a lot in knowing which waves to go on and where to sit. And I'm not saying that I did that great whatsoever. I'm saying that from my past experience, it really helped. But I still think there's miles and miles and miles of knowledge I can gain out on that reef. And I'm sure, with time, all the girls will get better. And yeah, it was really hard free surfing, honestly. It was just like, you kind of had to go and fall and die,
well, and it was a challenging forecast too, in the sense of, I'm not sure how early you got there, because there was swell, but it was kind of messy. And then when the event started, there was a bunch of small days, and everyone was looking at this sort of like gigantic day or couple of days that were coming. So it wasn't one of those situations where it's like, I'm here at the end of the road. There's a bunch of, 6-foot days that I can go out and get comfortable with. Everyone's getting plenty of waves. It was a little bit feast and famine, just in terms of like, there weren't a lot of waves at Teahupo'o, and then there were a ton of waves at Teahupo'o, and the event was on, and it's time to go.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy actually because actually I feel like a majority of the women had been to Teahupo'o beforehand, so they did get to see it in that like 6 to 8 foot range, and kind of have that a little bit of at least knowing what it looks like. Whereas, yeah, like you said before, the swell that was out there was southeast, and it was just pretty much missing the reef completely. Not a lot of barrels, and then when it was small, it was just tiny. Like it was tiny. So we didn't get really good prep at all.
Did anyone or anything, men's or women's, surprise you while you were out there?
I don't know. I think I was just really happy to see how well the women were getting along. I just think with such a condensed lineup, so much pressure stacking up for the last event of the year, and just having to, I don't know. It was a different experience for me, especially not particularly in the lineup, but because I stayed at Tahu'e Homestay, which also had Joanne, Caroline, Lakey, those girls were all there, and, we ate dinner together every single night, and it was just some sort of like camaraderie that I really never felt before, and I think that we just had all this like mutual respect towards one another that was like so awesome, and for me that just made me feel like really good inside. Like regardless, I just was like, this is so cool, like it's such a great experience, and we're here. Like for me, I felt like the whole time just like being in Tahiti and having the women compete there was a massive win, like a massive marble in the jar. I was just like, we're here. Like, yeah.
I think it's such a good point, and it's it's one of the stops on tour that I make it a point to go to every year if I can, and I think it's such a good point you bring up too, where there's no hotels at the end of the road, and you're staying with families, and you're staying with other surfers or your colleagues, and there's a version of it where it's like, obviously it's changed now, there's more connectivity and whatever, but there's still, you're isolated. There's less distractions. You're actually regarding each other as human beings, which is probably different to some of the other spots where everyone's sort of spread out all over town. They're in their isolated little bubbles, and then they come to compete. And at the end of the road, it's a completely different vibe.
It really is. Yeah. It's so tight knit, and, I think, like you said, the lineup's such a tight little zone. So I don't know, a lot can happen in a small zone. And I think the other thing I need to point out as well, that I think that was really awesome, was the men were just beyond gracious and kind to the women in the lineup. I think it was something that was really, really cool. I had Jack Robinson telling me to go on some waves. I had even Billy Kemper was out there, and he told me to go on a few. So, all the guys are really looking forward to seeing the girls like put their head down and charge. And I think that was something that for me was really cool. And I actually got the chance to travel with Jessie once to the event, and be a part of like that kind of weird free surf prepping for the event type of vibe. And when it's all the men, it's really chaotic, and they're very aggressive. And luckily I was the only female in the lineup at that time, and it helped a lot to get waves. But, it's just like a completely different vibe. And I think with the girls in the lineup, the men are just a bit more like head on a swivel, just making sure they're not like taking a woman's wave. And I think that was really cool.
It becomes much less Pirate Island when you mix it up, which is a nice thing. But
less
as you said, it's not totally, yeah. I mean, it hasn't really served the world that well. But what I was going to say is, it's nice to hear that the men are being gracious, but and you're really humble and sort of accepting this too. But you, and as you pointed out, other women, like, you've earned it. Like you guys always deliver when the venue's there, and it's just really, really impressive.
Thank you.
Switching gears for just a second, and I know we're going to get to the upcoming event, but spoiler alert for everyone who enjoys the Make or Break series on Apple TV Plus, you feature very, very heavily in season 2. It's an awesome episode, even the edit that I've seen so far. and you're incredibly, vulnerable, and the access you provide them is something else. And I think people are really going to have an even further appreciation for who you are and what you do after watching it. But a lot of that episode naturally focuses on last year's finals, right? Where you were the number 2 seed, you had a 2 out of 3 match with Carissa Moore. You win the opening heat. She's on the back foot, and then she wins the subsequent 2, and she wins the world title. I know you've talked about this a lot. I know you've talked about it certainly in the episode, but so close on one of your final waves and one of the final maneuvers. And had you completed it, it could have been a different story on the day. You've talked a lot about it, but I don't think people quite understand, how you felt after the finals had finished, and that window of time between coming up short of the world title and the 2022 championship tour season starting at Pipe. It doesn't sound like you surfed a lot at all. Can you kind of walk us through that window post last year's finals and before this season?
Yeah. So obviously last year was a bit of a roller coaster, getting back on tour with COVID and all that fun stuff. And then obviously coming into the finals as second in the world and having a chance at the world title, I felt like it was in my grasp. I knew that Carissa is one woman that I've beat before and I could potentially have beaten again. And so going into the final, I think I visualized so much and I believed so much that it could happen that it was almost like already happening in my head. And that's the part of athletes that I think people never really talk about, is this sort of mental prep work that you do internally for days and days on end. And then all of a sudden it slips out of your fingertips based off of one fall or one moment that, sometimes you really don't have control of, Obviously I had control of the maneuver, but it was a really weird section. It laid down for me. If it was just a normal lip, I could have hit it and made it. So like I said, the prep work mentally just kind of almost, if you don't succeed, sets you up for a sort of failure, so to speak. And not that I'm saying that I failed, and not that I'm saying that it was a huge disappointment, because after I had lost the title, I cried like a little girl for I think an hour after. And then every time I would think about it, I couldn't sleep for days, because I just kept thinking about me falling on that last wave. And I was like, what if...
It was just the one maneuver that you kept thinking about. Yeah, right.
Over and over. And sometimes you go through this process mentally where you're like, why? Why did that happen? Or how? And that's just normal. It's something that everyone goes through. It's part of psychology. If anyone knows a bit about psychology, it's just this, you go through this hill and you go up a hill, down a hill, up a hill, down a hill. And basically I was just in the, I forget what it's called, but it's some sort of stage when you're just trying to find acceptance for the reason. And so, it took me a really long time to find that reason, or be okay with that reason, I guess. And what happened after the title was I got straight back on the road with my husband to then support him on the Challenger Series. And I think that it wasn't something that I was very vocal with, of how hard I was having a time accepting the fact that I lost. And I just didn't really say it out loud until I felt it was needed to be said out loud, which was sometime around after France, or a little bit after France. I looked at Jessie and I was like, I don't know what I feel right now. I feel like I'm lost. I don't know if I want to surf again. I don't know if I want to give 110% again. How can I do this and have this heartbreak again? I can't, my body can't physically take it, And he was like, oh my gosh, my beautiful husband, so gracious and kind. He was like, first and foremost, I'm your husband and I'm here to support you, whether that's emotionally, mentally, physically, anything you need. Like, I'm here for you as a husband. Like, you need to tell me when you're feeling this way, because how else am I going to know if you're just silent? And right there, like, I started crying and stuff, and then after that, he said, I think you should talk to a psychologist and get her help to help you through this, because obviously you're not processing it like the way you should be. And so, after that, I spoke to a psychologist, got a lot better. I spent about a month at home, and then after we went to Brazil. And then as soon as Christmas hit, it was like a really fast month for me. Like, I did surf a lot at home, but I wasn't surfing like shortboards. I was like surfing 20s, longboards, just like having a blast kind of deal. And not
was
focusing.
you trying to like kind of fall back in love with it?
Exactly.
Was that kind of the?
It was something that I was like, I didn't feel like I needed to do anything. Like, when you're off season, you don't feel like you need to do something. You don't feel like you need to train, or you need to surf, or you need, you just kind of like stumble upon like, oh, I'm going to take this board out. And then you're like, oh, the waves are fun here. And then you just paddle out and you just kind of love surfing again. And it really did happen for me. Like, I really felt that, love for surfing again. Maybe not competition at that point, surfing, yes, competition, maybe. So I still was working through it, I think, mentally, to fall back in love with competition. And it's not something that I think actually happened before the season started. And obviously COVID was still alive and well during that time. And so I actually had gotten COVID twice within a month's time. And that actually stopped me from coming back home to do my prep work. So I was pretty much sick for about a month, on and off with COVID, which was terrible in Brazil while I was meant to be hanging out with my family. I was stuck in a room, and it really sucked. That was also a huge, it was just shitty. Yeah. So after I had like a day to come to Kauai to grab all my equipment and then fly to Oahu, and then I think 5 days later, pipe was starting. And I was just, my brain was just like, what's happening? I'm not ready.
Yeah. During that window, just listening to you talk about that, which I appreciate how candid you're being. It sounds like you were almost at a place where you're like, I'm done competitive, so I'm going to do something else. Like, was that ever kind of part of the thought process where it's like, I'm not doing this again, It's
weird because yes and no. Like, I think it was mostly coming from a place of fear, and that place of fear was to lose. And I think that's how I kind of started off my year, was like scared of losing. And whereas in my career, and I think a lot of people know this, I've just never really been that type to be afraid. Like, it's just never kind of been me. And so for me, I felt very like lost and confused. Like, I didn't know why this was happening to me. I was like, why me? Like, I'm not like this, So it was something new that I was dealing with. And obviously not having that time for me to like prep physically really affected me also mentally before the start of the season.
Of course. You mentioned seeking out a psychologist. Had you ever worked with like a sports psychologist before that, or was that your first experience with therapy?
Yeah, I've worked with sports psychologists before, but this was different. It wasn't really about it's not like, it wasn't about like competing, I guess. It was about like the process of like dealing with a loss, and being afraid to start trying again. And that was just something that I never really had ever happen to me ever. So I was like, what's happening?
It's interesting too, because we're going to get into it in the next segment, just on your background and where you came from, and not to say that you were, how do I want to put it? I mean, let's face it, like compared to some of your peers, you came up pretty off the radar, right? Like in terms of not having maybe mainstream sponsors, or having as much media attention. But because of who you are and what you've achieved on the world stage, particularly in waves of consequences, a consequence in and outside the jersey, you have established yourself as this sort of rock solid surfer. And it makes me think of this comment that Andy Irons made years and years ago. And he said, everyone wants you to win your first world title. And the second you do, you've got a target on your back. And I think that can apply not just to winning world titles, but also to establishing yourself, right? When you're a runner up in the world and you have all these waves of consequence bona fides, people are like, okay, we're at pipe. I'm going to take her down, right? Like, because it's just one of those things where it's like people build people up and then they want to take them down. That's kind of this, unfortunate part of human nature. But
part of competition.
It does feel a little bit like that. Totally, right? And that's competition. Like, I understand that too. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing to observe too. But as we'll get to, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just to close this segment out, men's or women, you can look back through rankings history across the 5 decades of competitive surfing. People that get so close to the ring or the throne or the world title, whatever it is, often have a huge regression year the next year because it's so physically and psychologically draining to get that close and not achieve it. So the fact that, and we'll get to this year later on, but the fact that you're able to put the pieces back together and rally and find yourself back in the title event, it's very, very rare. And so just a huge congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Of course. All right. Well, on that note, we are going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to wind the clock back on Tatiana Weston-Webb. We'll be right back. All right. So Tatiana, you're going to have to educate me and certainly our listeners on this point because you come off as a child of many worlds. We understand that you developed as a surfer in Kauai. You're now surfing for the country of Brazil. You're an Olympian. But how did it start for you? Where were you born? Where were you raised? What was your mom and dad, siblings? What was that all like?
So let's start from the beginning before where I was born. My father was born in England and raised in Florida. From a young age, I think he moved from England when he was about 2 or 3 and was raised in Florida. And my mom was raised and born in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And my mom used to be a professional bodyboarder and my dad was a surf bum. And when my dad turned around 27, he moved to the island of Kauai and eventually met my mom, fell in love on the beach, and 3 months later they were married. And thankfully to this day they're still together, which is pretty amazing. And yeah, it's very inspiring. But now to fast forward to my brother and I, my mom didn't really trust the doctors here in America. And she's had the same doctor her whole life. So she really wanted to have us in Brazil. And also her family was there. And, sometimes when you have more family, especially Brazilian family, it's tons of help and just the culture is a bit different than America. So my mom flew to Brazil to have my brother and same with me. I was born in Porto Alegre and we basically lied to the airlines. You're not allowed to, I think, travel with really, really young babies, but my mom lied, fibbed about our age and just flew us back to Kauai. And so I was only there for about 2 months, as long as they could stay there, and then came back. And yeah, so I was raised in Kauai, but every single year since, my parents made it very clear that they always wanted to go back to Brazil, have us learn the culture and the language. But it was harder for my mom because she spoke Portuguese, but my dad never spoke any Portuguese. So when my dad would watch us at home, we would speak Portuguese to him and he wouldn't understand. And then he was like, Tanira, I can't understand them. You have to speak only English. So therefore, my brother and I only heard it growing up, didn't really speak much, but we would try to speak it when we would go to Brazil as often as we could.
Interesting. So you largely grew up in Kauai with your brother, did you say?
Correct, my brother, yes.
Okay. And when did surfing start for you?
So when I was super young, I was probably about 2.5. My dad pushed me in on a Dick Brewer at Pullaholi, and I still had really crossed eyes, couldn't see much, but I remember my first wave and just being like drowning underwater, but like loving it after falling.
Well, hold on. We have to unpack two things here. Number one, have you asked your dad, were you like, Dad, was it like, did you push me out on the Dick Brewer so you could tell the story that I went out on a Dick Brewer? It wasn't just like some old beat up longboard. Like, it feels like that's a little calculated. Like, I love the idea. I'd probably do the same thing, but that's just what he had.
To this day, it was his board, his orange Dick Brewer. And
I love it.
Yeah, I remember him pushing me, and we have a photo, and I like can barely see him cross eyes. And,
so that's the other question I had. You were cross-eyed as a youngster.
Yes. I had astigmatism.
Oh,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
And so you were hooked, 2.5. Like you loved it.
No. That was the first time he
okay.
pushed me in. I had floaties on, so I didn't actually drown. But I remember when I fell, I was like drowning. But then I came up and I loved it, and I was super, super happy. But just because of the astigmatism, I think as a young girl, I just wasn't really like super psyched on it because I would have to take my glasses off. And afterwards, I started playing soccer, and soccer was my sport of choice. I loved it. I was actually pretty decent for a young.
What position?
For a young child. I was sweeper.
Sweeper. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, like center, I guess, center, whatever. But
yeah, center defender. Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, so I remember it got to a point where I couldn't wear my glasses in soccer anymore, and I would like put on these like goggles playing soccer, and it was so petrifying. I hated them so much, and they would always fog up, and I just like couldn't see anything, and I was like, oh man, this is terrible. So my brother was like around 10 years old, and then he told my dad that he wanted to start surfing again, and obviously as a little sister I copied everything my brother did, and so I was like, me too. And then so went to my first spot meet in Honolulu, and he bought me a yellow Xanadu. I'll never forget. And the thing was real thick, good enough but it was a short board, but it was good enough to have me stand on it. And after that, I remember surfing again, taking off my glasses, going out, surfing again. And then it was just like, I was hooked. Like every day I was like, Dad, please take me surfing. And I would like cry if I couldn't go surfing because my dad would work till late. And so I would be like so sad if I couldn't surf. And I remember there was like one day where I counted, like I surfed like 30 days in a row. And I was like, Dad, I surfed 30 days in a row. And then I had a fit because the next day he couldn't take me. And I was like, you're breaking my streak. So that's when I fell in love with surfing. And then I started competing in the Andy and Bruce Irons contest, the annual event that they have here every year. And the first year I lost like last place for straight away. And then I said, Dad, just wait. I'm going to come back and win next year. And that it happened. I went and I won the next year, and that was it. Like,
what was the difference between year 1 and year 2? What'd you do?
Oh, year 1 I had just started surfing, so I was terrible.
Okay. You had a few more reps. I get it.
And then obviously as evolution happens, like Dad gets a shorter board for me, and like it just kept happening, and yeah, it happened.
You've heard that story of when, I think Bruce tells it in maybe one of the documentaries, of when they were younger and Andy, they're competing, and Keala Kennelly beat him in an event, and he ended up getting a trophy, like 3rd place or something. But Bruce is like, he was so mad, he took the trophy and like ran across the park and like chucked it in this tree so hard it got stuck there. And I was thinking of like, that should be part of the event. Like if you don't win, you get to like throw your trophy in a tree or something. You get pick it up afterwards. But speaking of speaking of that area though, like it's like Kauai is such a unique community, and there's very few of these around the world. Like, maybe Newcastle comes to mind, even though it's a little bit apples and oranges, just where it's not a huge population center, but it has this like outsized component of like so many good surfers. You've got, Bruce and Andy Irons, Titus Kinimaka, Bethany, Alana, Kiala, Malia, Kala, Kamale, Danny Fuller. Like the list goes on and on and on. It just seems like a very, very special surfing community.
Yeah, it is. And I think, it's just so awesome because there's so many different amazing types of waves here. And it just really born and breeds surfers. But we all have that mutual respect for this beautiful place we call home. We don't, go around posting videos or photos. We really respect where we come from. And respect is something that you learn very quickly when you're a grom here in the ocean. And if you don't learn it really quickly, well, back in the day, you learned it really, really quickly. But if you don't learn it, you're going to get told straight. And I think that's what really makes you so respectful and understanding of what a beautiful place we have for ourselves and what kind of protection we need to keep on it. And I think, like I said, it's just, you look at the person surfing the wave and they rip, whether it's a 60-year-old or a 10-year-old, and everyone just rips here. And so it's just kind of like this competitive sort of mentality. Every time you get in the water, you see some guy getting drained and you're like, oh, I want to get a better one, and that's what that brings upon us, is having so many good surfers. Everyone has that little itch to get a better wave than the other guy or the other girl, and that I think that's just what makes us, good surfers.
Was there anyone in particular who, especially when you're younger, you sort of modeled your surfing approach off of, whether it was stylistically, or was there any surfers in particular, or that you're like, yeah, I'm going to try to do a turn like that or put my hand like that?
The one guy that I loved watching more than anything, and especially live, in person, was Bruce. I thought his surfing was just next level amazing, and just his style and everything, and then having him paddle out, at pine trees and being able to watch him, and it was the coolest thing ever. But in that, I guess saying that, I didn't really try to model his surfing. I just was very inspired by it. And then the other person that I drew a lot of inspiration from was Bethany. When I was younger, I remember going up to her house because she lived right around the corner, and knocking on the door after everything happened and having her sign my, magazine. And I was really just inspired by her. And it was right when I had my first little bikini sponsor. And so I was beyond myself, just being able to talk to her and being friends with her and stuff. And yeah, she inspired me a lot.
Yeah, she is amazing. I've had the benefit of knowing her for years and years now, and even talking about the attack, I'm sure she's had to do it a million times at this point, so she's well practiced. But she's just very comfortable and adjusted and candid and very happy to share with people what it felt like, what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
For something that would have been so traumatic. I'd imagine for the community there at that time, that would have been something that rattled everybody.
It did. It really did. And I just remember being at school one day at Honolulu Elementary School and hearing sirens go by. And then everyone got the news later that day that Bethany had gotten attacked by a shark. And it was just something that was so surreal, really on the North Shore of Kauai, when we're a little town where nothing really happens. It just was something that was very, at the time, just a shock. And I think especially because Bethany had such a high trajectory level in her competitions already, she was meant to be the world champion, she was that person along with Alana. And it was just, I think I just remember being I don't know, just so shocked. There was nothing really you could think. And then also, not to mention, you're okay, so where are we gonna surf? Do we surf?
Right.
Is that a thing? Are we not surfing? And then obviously as a little girl, you don't get so much information about the shark and what happens. And eventually they went and caught the shark.
Right.
So
Yeah. Ooh. Well, so you talked about, being very, very good at soccer, the goggles kind of ruining it for you, a rapid improvement in competition surfing from year to year. Was there, and you talked about having your first bikini sponsor around this time, was there a moment for you where you were thinking, this is going to be my life, I'm going to be a professional surfer, or was that always on your mind? I'm wondering if there was a moment or a series of moments where you kind of intentionally made that decision to say, yep, this is what I'm going to do. It's not going to be these other things I'm interested in.
yeah, I think there was a point in my young life where I continued to play soccer after I surfed, and I just remember one day like being benched. Like I was playing up a division, and I was like under 14s, and I think I was like 12 or something. And I remember like being so irritated because the coach benched me because all the 14-year-olds wanted to play, and I couldn't play because I was 12. And I was just so upset. I looked at my mom and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore if I can't play. Like, what's the point, And my mom was like, okay, well, like, you can choose. Like, it'll be easier on me. What do you want to do? Soccer or surfing? And I was like, well, 100% surfing, like, plus, as a Grom in Kauai, surfing is like the thing to do. It's not really like you go play soccer. It's like everyone goes to the beach, gets dropped off, and you surf all day long, And that was just like the lifestyle. And so obviously all my friends were doing it, and I was like, heck yeah, surfing. Like you can drop me off at the beach. So that was about when I was 12, 13. And yeah, and then I remember taking competing more seriously. My mom said I was like, I would be the first to go to sleep if I'd have a competition the next morning, and I would eat really well, and I would like stretch and like do all these things. And my mom was like, whoa, she's really like, she's a little competitive girl. Like she's really on. And I think my mom just always really saw that within me because she was a competitor herself. And so she really honestly convinced my dad to go into credit card debt whilst paying for me to be competing everywhere. And I'm really grateful that they gave me that opportunity because eventually I went and won nationals, and I was 14, I think, at the time. And I remember I think I was 14 or 15, and Carissa had just won her first world title. And that for me was like, whoa, like Carissa just won her title. And then, when you like look up on that list of like names on NSA that like who won those divisions, and the division I had just won, Carissa had won that division before. And I was like, oh my gosh, like if she won this and I just won this and she just won a title, like maybe I can win a title. So that was like the initial, like, I think I'm going to do this, and it never really was like a choice. It was just like, I loved surfing and competition so much that I just kept doing it. And then eventually, I got sponsored by Body Glove when I was 17. And, they were the first company that really believed in me, after some time. And later that year, when I was turning 18 was the year of my qualification. So I qualified that year. And I think even the guys at Body Glove were like shocked. They just like didn't really think that I was going to qualify. And then all of a sudden I qualified, and here I was. Like I was getting a call up when I was, I think, 18. Right when I had turned 18, I got the first call up for a wild card replacement at Rio. And I was like, 17, competing in a world tour event. I just didn't really like have any realization as to what I was doing, But after that first event, it was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, this is definitely like what I want to do. And so I put my head down, and that year I qualified.
The Body Glove thing makes sense, because you got Bruce in Kauai. He was one of Body Glove's guys for a long, long time. I have heard from other surfers, that Kauai it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. We talked about all the benefits, like how talented everyone is in the water and the levels of respect and the ability to develop into a great surfer. But I think even Malia was commenting on, well, you're not around an industry or like a media epicenter in Kauai. In point of fact, like as you said, like we don't post videos or photos or anything like that. So if you are a surfer from the outer islands and not, the North Shore, the South Shore, or Orange County, it is harder. You do have to fight harder to get sponsors, to get media attention. Is that something that you experienced as well?
Yeah. Luckily, when I was super young, I was 11 years old, and I was doing a Haleiwa Menehune contest, and I ended up winning. Roxy came and offered me a sponsorship, and it was like, for me, obviously, it was like surreal. I was like over the moon, but that didn't last super long. And for me, I was at that moment, I felt like I was one of the, I just felt like I was one of the up and comers, the good girls, and not one sponsor was looking at me. Like I didn't have anyone coming after me, trying to sponsor me. It wasn't like, it was really weird. And so for me, I almost had this like prideful sort of thing happening. And I remember being like, man, I'm going to prove everyone wrong. Like all these girls that are sponsored, like I'm going to beat all of them. And, and I just remember that being like a motivational factor for me. And yeah, it worked out. But honestly, growing up on Kauai, it's a really, really hard thing to get a sponsor. Like it just doesn't happen. Even on Oahu, like Oahu kids are like the epicenter of winter. And, like now, like if you're from Kauai and you're trying to rent a house on the North Shore of Oahu, like that doesn't happen. Like unless you have friends, like you don't get to go for a month at a time unless you have someone that's going to host you for a month, like you can't even be there because it's so expensive. Like imagine all these parents from a young age are trying to invest in their kids, and like, especially nowadays, I don't even know how people do it, but it's just crazy expensive on Oahu. Like,
well, I'm glad you brought this up because I'm going to try to bridge this to a topic that Nathan Hedge and I were talking about when he was on the show, because and I'm fascinated by this too, because I'll use Australia as an example, but I'm under the understanding that in the 1940s, when World War II was happening, all the coastal property in Australia was pretty inexpensive because the people with money thought, well, we don't want to live next to the beach because if Japan invades us, that's the first place they're going to go.
Yeah.
And so this funny thing happened where it was a lot of working class families. It was a lot of people that needed public housing. That was what was on the coastline, right? And so from the 40s onward, you had just generations of working class families. And because they lived there, their kids and their grandkids are the ones that got really, really good at surfing. So, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the superstar surfers that had all the talent came from, a lack of means, really, in terms of background. And it's not just Australia, but as you pointed out, it's the North Shore too. It's almost everywhere these days where it's becoming so financially prohibitive to live near the beach that you're kind of losing that element of world-class surfer that isn't already wealthy, right? In a way, because that's kind of like, well, my parents have money and that's how I can be at the beach and that's how I can get better. And I don't have an opinion either way on it. It's certainly happening though.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, times are different and times are tough, like COVID, inflation, really. Like, I don't know how kids or their parents are affording to pay for them all these new surfboards, all these new equipment. Flights are at an all-time high. So, I think really props to the parents nowadays that are trying to get their kids to be professional surfers because they're obviously investing lots of money and yeah, like I said, it's doggy dog world. It's hard right now.
It is, but and bringing it back to the Hedgie conversation, he's like, well, that's why the Brazilians have done so well. He goes, everyone else has gotten almost a little too comfortable, where everyone has access to the same boards and the same videos and the same diet and the same fitness, more or less. He goes, the point of difference is how hungry you are and what your motivation is. And he sort of credits the Brazilians for like, look, they're here to fight, like, and they're here to win. You know, I'm assuming here, but do you, in the surfing world, kind of consider yourself an outsider? Not that you're not, universally loved or anything, but you came from an outer island. You, as you pointed out, like, you felt like you had to beat all these young girls that had, longtime sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. Do you consider yourself an outsider? And if so, do you think that that's actually helped you in the competitive sense?
I mean, my hair is really white, so I've stuck out like a sore thumb my whole life. Especially with cross eyes when I was a little kid competing.
A Kauaian Targaryen or something like that. Yeah. But it makes, I mean, it makes sense, and it's I don't know. Like I've just noticed that, having had the privilege of watching you come onto the tour, and your whole approach, and particularly the strengths in your surfing, which are many, they do feel like a point of difference, right? Like there's not a ton of goofy footers on tour, but you also have this really radical, like rail focused, like vertical approach, right? And as we talked about earlier, when you came onto the tour, you were really eager to get barreled and charged, which wasn't a very common thing at the time. So yeah, I kind of think that the puzzle pieces of Tatiana Weston-Webb kind of lead towards like, yeah, this outsider mentality has actually helped me develop into a world title contender.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really funny that you point that out because, like coming from Hawaii, obviously I'm a Haole here. So it's not like I'm Hawaiian or anything. And then when I go to Brazil, it's not like they're like, oh, you're Brazilian, because I have white hair and I don't look Brazilian whatsoever. And usually they get really shocked when I start speaking Portuguese and talking like that. It's really funny. So yeah, I get what you're saying 100%. And I think that you're right. It's probably had a big influence in my life as to the surfer I became and why I acted certain ways. And yeah, I'm really grateful for it, honestly, because it's pushed me in ways that I don't think other people may have possibly been pushed. And, when you have a mentality of trying to prove people wrong, a lot of the times it just drives you to be a better person and a better competitor. And yeah, I feel like maybe that happened.
Unquestionably. Let's talk about your rookie year, right? Because as you pointed out, you had a few opportunities in 2014. Your first full year was 2015. You finished 7th in the world, which is incredible. But maybe more impressive than that is you made a final at a time when the women's surfing powers were really Steph and Carissa and Tyler, and it was, and you've got Sally and Lakey and Courtney, and it's they kind of are monopolizing the top of the rankings at that point in history. What were the things that stood out to you about the level of surfing and the level of competition at the championship tour during your rookie season?
Well, I honestly can't even remember.
It's blurry.
I just remember I don't know, I don't think I was ready. I don't know. I didn't think I was ready, but I was like, well, here I am, let's do this, and I'm such big fans of the Stephs, of the Tylers, of the Sallys, these hardworking women that put their head down and don't give up, and also have very big, stories themselves. As well as Carissa, Carissa was always my favorite surfer, and to be competing against her was just like, I would look over, okay, let's go, let's do this, but I just remember being so excited, even though I knew maybe my surfing wasn't 100% ready. I just remember being so excited at the opportunity and just loving every minute of it. I was a grom. I think I just frothed out on surfing all day. And when I was younger, I didn't actually travel that much. My first ever surf trip was actually to Tahiti, and I was 17, and that was that was the first surf trip I had ever been on. I had never been to Indo. I had never been to Mexico, like never been on a surf trip, and Body Glove made that happen for me when I was 17, which was really exciting. And they actually chose to bring along my brother, which was even more exciting. And yeah, so I think for me, like everything was just such a beautiful experience because I had not really traveled so often. So it was almost like a surf trip every time I would like go competing. Like I was at a new place. I was like, oh my gosh, such good waves here, such good waves there. And I was just like freaking out. And so for me, like all that was like very brand new. And yeah, I think it just made me just really grateful and excited.
It makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you say you weren't ready, but we can talk about your sophomore year because of the tens of millions of surfers there are in the world, such a tiny fraction, it's not even 1%, ever compete, you know? And of that tiny, tiny pool, even a smaller group ever compete, you know, in an ASP, WSL, like pro junior event, and then a smaller group in the QS, and then a smaller group in the CT. And my point is that for all the surfers that have qualified for the CT, both men and women, a tiny fraction of them have ever won a CT event. And you won one your sophomore season. You won the US Open of Surfing at Huntington Beach, which was a CT in 2016. And you finished the year 4th. So maybe it's full circle back to the Irons Brothers contest at Pine Trees, where it's like, oh, it took me a year to figure it out, and then I figured it out. It was no problem.
Oh, I don't know. It all happened so quickly, I guess. I don't know. I just remember being more grateful than ever to be a surfer. And my sophomore year, I remember thinking that the year previous, Joanne had won, and that was her first win. And I remember being like, okay, so Joanne won last year. It was her first win. Like, maybe it could be my first win. And that's just the thought process that I had going on in my head during that event. And I was like, if she could do it, I could do it, you know? Like, if she wins this event first time, it was Lakey's first win as well a few years before that. So for me, I had watched like 0 to 100, and that was like a bit of an inspiration for me. And, you know, then sure enough, like that was what happened. And I was like against Malia, and she had never won a CT event either. And yeah, it was very nerve-wracking final. I remember falling on most of my waves, but luckily making one good wave, and that was the difference.
2018, you announced that you're switching who you surf for from Hawaii to Brazil. Talk us through that decision from your perspective, and I mean, how did it go when you announced that to the world? Because it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, so obviously when you're starting to compete, you represent the region that you compete from going into everything. And so they don't actually ever ask you previous to getting on tour, like what country do you want to represent, or do you have another passport? Like they never really asked that. And that was something that I never really considered until the Olympic Committee of Brazil came up to me one year, which was 2016, I believe. And they said, hey, like, we would really love to have you surf for us. Like, I think this could be something super cool. And at the moment I was like, oh, wow. Like, I didn't even know that was like an option. Like, I didn't know you could switch your countries. And obviously there was rumors of like the Olympics happening and stuff. And for me, I was like, at that moment I was qualifying for the US, I think. But anyways, long story short is when I actually considered how I feel as a person, I just felt like I had so many roots tied to Brazil, and I love the country so much. Troy. Wait, sorry. My dad's being loud. Dad.
Oh,
Try to be loud. Try to be less loud. Sorry.
Tell him I say hi.
Oh. Well, he's walking away now. Sorry.
He's gone now. Tell him later.
Anyway, so I just felt so many ties to Brazil, and yeah, it was just something that I was like, oh, this is an easy choice for me. Like, I'm obviously not Hawaiian, but I am Brazilian. And so, yeah, it was just, that was it.
Very cool. And it was at a time too when obviously there's cultural differences around the world, but particularly in Brazil, there's been amazing, Brazilian women surfers from, Tita Tavares to Jacqueline Silva, Silvana Lima. But it was also at a time where they didn't have a ton of representation on the championship tour, but the men did, and it feels like, especially in recent years, like they have really brought you into the group. Not that you weren't before, but it does seem like a traveling family of Brazilians on tour.
Yeah, I just feel so blessed to be a part of their family. The boys are amazing. I think Felipe is probably one of my best friends on tour. We shared a lot of very intimate moments of losses and successes, and I think that's something that's very it's just not really shared amongst athletes that much. So like when you reach out to someone and you have that mutual like understanding, it just it clicks. So I have that friendship with Felipe, and then obviously Italo, Gabriel, my husband being Brazilian and being really good friends with all of them, and then guys like Miguel, Samuel. I just feel like they're my family. It's hard to explain, but yeah.
Of course, yeah. And for the listeners out there, your husband Jesse Mendes, world-class surfer, been on the CT, used to beat Gabriel's brains in, I think, when they were junior surfers, still at surfing at a very high level. I'm not going to talk about him because he's going to get his own podcast later, so we don't have to worry about that. Sharp Eye Surfboards, Marcio Zovi. How long have you been riding this?
I got on Sharp Eye when it was my second year on tour, I believe, or maybe third actually.
2015, 2016.
Yeah, I think it might have been my third, towards the end of my third year on tour. I remember I loved Carol's for so long, and we had the best relationship, and he shaped me many boards that led to a lot of victories and successes, and I obviously couldn't have gotten it to my point in my career without him as my base shaper, and he always believed in me from a very young age. He sponsored me when I was 11 after winning the Haliva Menehune contest. So that was really, really cool for me. And then afterwards, after a certain time, you just feel like there's certain ways you can continue to progress. And I started trying different boards. And I remember trying a Mayhem in Brazil and loving it, and trying to get some of his boards, but unfortunately there were some complications, so I couldn't get his boards. And then I was really good friends with all the Brazilians at the time, and Yufu, who is Sharp Eye team manager, came up to me at the US Open and was like, I'm getting a board shape for you. And I said, okay, sounds good, and the next event he brought me 2 boards, and sure enough, I jumped on one of them, and I was like, whoa, this feels so weird. Like, I thought it wasn't like a good board at first, but I think it's just because it was so fast that my body reaction wasn't keeping up with the board speed. So then my husband, Jesse, was like, my boyfriend at the time was like, Tati, you don't understand. He was like, the board's just too fast for you. You need to adapt to the board. And so sure enough, I just kept riding the board, and then it just clicked, and all of a sudden it was the best board ever. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. I was like, you didn't really need to say much after that. This is it. And so I remember ordering more boards from him and riding the Sharp Eye in the next event, which was Portugal. And I'll never forget, one of the judges came up to me and he was like, you changed boards, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, I changed boards. And he was like, looks good. And I was like, okay, judges like it, let's go. So that was kind of the story. And ever since then, I've been with Sharp Eye. So
that's good. And I mean, you were in before the I don't know, the what would you call it? The stampede of
Right.
CT surfers trying to get on the program, and they likely had to build that program around you and your performance and your feedback as well. It is really it is a major part of the 2022 championship tour narrative, just how radically successful Marcio Zuvi and Yufu Penrose and the Sharp Eye program has been. We were doing this little Skunkworks project of board builder rankings, and they are just, there's so much daylight between them and second place on the rankings. It's insane, and it's well earned because they put a lot of work into it. On the topic of partners that support you, but have done so for so long. You mentioned Body Glove. There's also Rockstar. It does feel like these are sponsor surfer relationships that are symbiotic. And what I mean by that is it doesn't sound and it doesn't look like from the outside that you're just an athlete taking a paycheck and putting a sticker on the board. It really feels like they're building these brands around who you are becoming, as a world title contender. Now I might be wrong there, but it really does feel like you're informing these brands just as much as they're kind of supporting you on the other side.
What's crazy for me is how much of an actual family Body Glove is to me. And I feel like no matter if I'm a professional surfer, if I'm a mother, if I'm just another person on the beach, like they're going to support me because they love me and believe in me that much. And I really feel that, like, truthfully to my heart. And something that really reflected that too was when Body Glove also picked up Jessie as a surfer. And for me, I was just like, oh my God, they love us, like they really consider us family. And for us, that's really important, and I think these brands nowadays, especially surfing brands, it's so hard to like really feel like 100% secure and like they understand you and who you are and how you feel. And I think just since the beginning, Body Glove's always been that way in considering like what I wanted or how I feel or like everything, they just have been very understanding and loving since the beginning. So it's a relationship I hope will last for years and years to come, and I'm sure it will. So, and honestly, including Rockstar, it's been the same thing. They've just always been so supportive ever since I was a teenager. Honestly, I was 16 when I got sponsored by them. So it's been, or maybe 17 actually, I think 17. So it's been a really long time with Rockstar as well. And they just believe in me and they're so supportive of me. And, brands along the way that have came and kind of like just joined that understanding and respect have been like Youth Theory. Bonsai Bowls has been with me since the beginning of time, honestly. And they're just the best family and we just love each other. And sometimes to me, it's not about, I guess I don't want to say this because it sounds super cliche, but it's not about like the money. It's about how happy you are representing these people that are as equally happy to represent you. And for me, I'm not looking to be the most paid athlete in the world. I'm looking to be one of the happiest and content athletes in the world. And honestly, sometimes money doesn't buy happiness, and I can tell you that for a fact. So I'm just really, I feel really blessed to be a part of the brands that I still am to this day.
Well, and they're just as, if not more fortunate that you're a part of them, and going back to the Body Glove conversation, they were underrepresented, if not completely non-represented on the elite stage for years and years and years. And their relationship with you and your performance has really put them on the map in a major way. So it's very, very cool. We have a couple more topics to get to, as well as our listener questions and the lightning round, but we'll take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Okay. So we're going to bring this podcast full circle because this is dropping in the days leading up to the 2022 Rip Curl WSL Finals at Lower Trestles. It's the one-day event between the best surfers of the season to determine the world champion. This will be, as we talked about, your second run at this event. You're going to be the number 3 seed this year. So it's slightly different. I don't know if you've given much thought to, well, if I'm not the number 1 seed, which seed do I want to be? Does it even matter? I'm curious. Are you like, is 3 better than 2? Is 5 better than 3? Like, what are you feeling about the format and where you'd like to be if you can't be in that number 1 spot?
I'll be honest with you. I really liked the number 2 seed last year. I thought it was really beneficial surfing 1 heat before the best out of 3 match, and being able to win that heat obviously was something that you needed to do in order to go on. And for me, it just felt like I had a bit of like I broke the ice and I was ready to go for the next 2 heats, and obviously I won the heat afterwards. And then I think obviously Carissa turned her competitive fire on, and she got the best out of me for the last 2. But I really liked being 2nd seed. I thought it was something that, I knew I could work with. And I'm not going to lie, I know being the 3rd seed, I'm going to probably have to surf 1 more heat if that is the case, if God allows it. But I just feel like I have so much experience from surfing in that many heats, especially on that pressure-filled day, that I kind of just like don't feel that much pressure. I don't know. It's really hard to explain, but I just feel like because I've been there and I've worked with that amount of pressure, it's almost like less pressure. And so I'm just really, I don't know, I'm looking forward to surfing and hopefully surfing really good and hopefully making some heats.
I mean, there's probably, I know we talked a lot about what happened last year, but I'd imagine there's 2 big positives that come out of it. Number 1, from a confidence standpoint, it's like, yeah, I had a wonky section, but if I hit that, I'm the world champ. I'm at this level performance-wise, you know. And then 2, as you said, it's like, well, I went through that, you know, and so I feel like I can handle kind of anything that's coming at me. In this format, as you said, you have the experience, and you're going to be facing the winner of match 1, which will be either Brisa Hennessy or 7-time world champion Stephanie Gilmore. When you're at an event like this, and maybe it's all events, does your opponent factor into your preparation, to your approach to the heat, or are you more the competitor that is, I'm just focused on me and surfing the best I can, doesn't matter who I'm surfing against?
Yeah, I think especially with this sort of format, you're definitely more focused on yourself because you could come up against any 5 of the ladies, or any 4 of them, excuse me. So in that case, you're not really focusing on your opponent unless you have a very, very great understanding of how you can affect them mentally doing something specific in the beginning of the heat, which is not that often. Because, you never know, like, it could work with you or it could work against you, whatever your strategy is. And sometimes surfing is that one variable factor that'll never be the same. So you really just got to have everything clicking.
That makes sense. We talked about, how in a way being an outsider is really informed how you approach your profession, your surfing, and in a lot of ways given you a competitive advantage. In this year's Rip Curl WSL Finals, you're the only goofy footer on the women's side. Italo is the only goofy footer on the men's side. But at a wave like lowers with this machine-like canvas, having a point of difference is a huge competitive advantage, and I think it's one that you wield very, very well, as we've talked about at every event. I guess I don't really have a question aside from how self-aware are you of this point of difference in your surfing?
Well, almost so aware that sometimes I turn off my brain to not go left at lowers. So
right.
Honestly, and sometimes that could be a win or a lose. And I don't know, like, I know that my backhand gets good scores, but I honestly feel like with the surfing that I've been doing as well on my forehand that I can get just as much scores now. And I remember surfing one wave after the final last year, after I had lost the title. It was a left, and I just freaking was so mad that I like surfed it really good, and sure enough, Carissa's dad came straight up to me and he's like, I'm so grateful you didn't go left during that final because your last wave would have been the score. And I was like, I'm so pissed. So I don't know. It's such a hard thing because, you know, everyone's like, yeah, you got an amazing backhand. But really, like, I love going left and I really feel like my forehand's getting just as good. And so to answer your question, yes, I'm aware. But I think this year I'm going to be a little bit more open, especially just focusing on if the wave is the right wave. And that's really the key factor is like, doesn't matter if it's a left or a right. You just got to have a good wave that's bending back at you that you can smash.
I was thinking about this, you know, when I was looking at, you know, the Final Five men's and women's, and I was thinking that it's so important to have the right camp of people around you. And there's not really a formula to it because everyone's different and everyone has different things and different types of people and different roles that make them comfortable. You know, for you in particular, we've talked about your husband, Jesse Mendez. There's John Oda, who's a great support. There's your filmer, Greg Browning, who is an elite level surfer himself, but maybe the most humble guy I've ever met in my life. And Ross Williams, maybe the most well-adjusted member of the Momentum generation. It's like an all-star little group of people you have in your camp. And I guess it's something that you have to build over time. Like you have to build your little tribe and something that you've done to great effect. Can you talk to us a little bit about that process and just what it means having them in your corner, whether physically or over the phone or on whatever the computer, at the upcoming event is for you?
Yeah, I mean, another cliche saying, here it goes, is there's no I in team. And for me, a team, like a solid group of people, actually as a surfer is one of the most necessary things that you could ever have. And I know it's like everyone says it's an individual sport, you can feel so alone, but that's like the last thing I feel because I have so many supporters around me. And I'm really lucky. I've been working with Oda since I was 17 years old. And he actually walked in with me to Body Glove where we both met Greg Browning in the same room. And I've known Greg since I was 17. And after stopping working with Leandro the year of 2020, I looked over because I was on a Body Glove trip and I looked at Greg and I was like, do you want to travel with me? And he was like, yeah, I'm down. Let's do it. And then he was like, but like, I'm not really a coach. Like, I'm a filmer. He was like, you should talk to someone who's a coach. And you know, and he was like, do you have anyone in mind? And I said, well, I've been watching how Ross works with Bethany on Kauai because he started working with Bethany. And I said, I really like his approach. And I always find myself re-listening to what he has to say during his commentary for my heats. And I really take a lot of what he says and I apply it to my surfing or my heat strategy. And so he said, why don't you give Ross a call and then get back to me? You know, kind of like maybe Ross is the right guy for you. So I said, okay, let's give Ross a call. And sure enough, I gave Ross a call and he was like, you know, let me just make sure with Bethany. And Bethany was like 100% like, Tati's amazing. She's, you know, Bethany and I are really big fans of one another. And Ross is like, okay, so let's work out a deal. And we worked it out. And then I was still like, but I really want Greg on tour. And then Ross was like, well, I'm not going to travel so often because my family is really important to me. And I've been doing the thing with John for ages. And he said, I'm just kind of drained. But he says, the good thing is I know every single lineup on tour. And I know Greg actually can help you on the road. So he can film you and we can get your clips and we'll technically critique overseas and call me before heats, text me before heats, and you know, we'll make game plans. And that's exactly how it works. So Greg's like my road coach, not necessarily coach. He's like my road buddy kind of like prep guy, helps me have everything in a line and films me, obviously, and he's an amazing filmer. And yeah, he helps me with that, and Ross then helps me with my technical and strategic prep.
Well, it is an impressive stable of people that you've assembled in your corner, and they're very, very fortunate to be working with you as well. We did put out some feelers to our Instagram followers at the Lineup Pod for questions. We got a lot back, but we've whittled it down to 3. The first question is from @k.beachy, who asks, who is going to be the next Brazilian to join the Women's Championship Tour?
Oh, this is such a good question. Okay. So I'm going to give a few options. Sofia Medina. She is amazing. And if she's anything like her brother, she's going to be a workhorse. And with her work ethic and Charles' work ethic, I think she has a great chance of qualifying. There's this young girl, her name's Laura Rupp, and she's amazing. She's sponsored by Roxy. She's won a few events, and she's really young, so I think she's only 15. And she just has a solid base, like really like hits the lip hard and never falls, and it's pretty amazing. And I think that she has a lot of potential, especially if she continues her technique and switches a few little things up. And gosh, there's a lot of them, but I think there's this girl Naire from Ubatuba. She is amazing as well, super firm in her stance. Needs a few little technical figuring out things to happen with her. And then I'd say the last is Bella Nalu. Bella she's Pato Teixeira's daughter. Pato is a big wave surfer, been traveling around the world his whole life, and so Bella's also been a part of that journey, and she's surfed a lot of really good waves, and you can just see her techniques getting better and better and better. And if she puts her head down, she can definitely be on tour. So I'd say out of those 4 or 5 girls, one of those are going to make it.
It's a great answer. Next question is from @vaguely_ethnic_guy, who asks, who or what motivates you to charge some of the heaviest waves in surfing?
Well, when I was younger, it was my brother. He always motivated me and always asked me why I wasn't surfing when it was big, or if I wanted to go surfing with him, or he would take me to the spots that are a bit more heavy and just tell me to go. And so I'd say Troy definitely was a person that inspired me to become a surfer, a better surfer in heavier waves.
Very cool. And the last question from the Instagram community is from Almeida Alcentia, who asks, what conditions would be ideal for you at lowers for this year's Rip Curl WSL Finals?
Ooh, the conditions I think that would be ideal for me is probably like double overhead and consistency. I hope it's really consistent and bigger. Like something like last year would be awesome.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you to the Instagram community and the Twitter community at the Lineup Pod. If we didn't answer your question, you can always hit us up. We'll do our best. We try to respond to everybody. We're now down to the final segment, which is the lightning round presented by BF Goodrich. These are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can.
Okay.
First question. If you could only have one board set up for the rest of your life, a single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
2+1.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
It's called The Court of Thorns and Roses.
Best surf film ever?
Oh gosh, people are gonna hate me for this one. Oh gosh. Scratching the Surface. Actually, a fly in the champagne. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Sorry.
No, I'm into it. That's I like the pivot. Next one. One wave you never have to go back to.
Wave?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, this is a hard question. I don't want to offend anyone.
That's okay. I'll give you an out because a lot of people are like, I don't want to offend anybody. It's totally fine.
Okay, I'll just say.
Without saying it, do you have one though in your mind where you're like, yeah, if I never went back, that'd be okay?
Yeah, there's this wig on Kauai that sucks, but I always go back to it because I always need to practice.
I get it. It's always our cross to bear. Okay, next question. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life, which would it be?
Oh, I'd say macaronis.
Best person to share the lineup with?
Jesse.
Worst person to share the lineup with?
Jesse. Oh, sorry.
I like it. That's the truth. The truth is the truth. Okay, last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by
being grateful.
Tatiana Weston-Webb, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. I'm going to see you in a couple of days down at Lower Trestles. I hope everyone watches, and yeah, I hope you give one for the goofy footers out there. It'll be a show.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, sorry if anything.